Colombia's 0-0 draw with Portugal was not a game without tactical ideas. In fact, both teams had some really interesting mechanisms in possession. Colombia had James Rodriguez constantly dropping, drifting, and connecting play. They had Luis Diaz occupying narrow spaces, fullbacks providing width, and John Cordoba giving them a direct outlet against Portugal's centre backs. Portugal, meanwhile, had their usual technical quality. Vitinha, Ruben Neves, and Bruno Fernandes could all help progress the ball, while João Cancelo and Nuno Mendes gave them different ways of attacking wide areas. But despite all of that, the game finished goalless, and the reason is fairly simple. Both teams could progress the ball, both teams could arrive in promising areas, but neither team consistently attacked the box with enough numbers or vertical movement. This was a game defined by control, fluidity, and technical quality, but also by a real lack of penetration. Colombia initially built in something close to a 4-2-2-2. It was slightly asymmetric because of their individual roles within the system. Lerma and Puerta acted as the double pivot, while John Arias operated higher in the right half space. The fullbacks were Colombia's main source of width. On the opposite side, James Rodriguez moved into a left attacking midfield position, forming almost a box midfield with Luis Diaz taking up slightly narrower positions ahead of him. That gave Colombia a lot of central connection. They had two deeper midfielders, two attacking midfielders, and Cordoba as the striker with Luis Diaz playing off of him, who could either occupy the centre-backs or provide a direct target. Portugal wanted to press from goal kicks. Ronaldo would start on Lakimi before moving on to the goalkeeper, forcing Colombia's play towards the right-hand side. Ruben Neves would jump onto Puerta, leaving Bruno Fernandes with the responsibility for Jefferson Lerma. Behind them, Ruben Diaz would be ready to engage James Rodriguez, while Vitinha looked after John Arias. The biggest problem was that the jumps were not coordinated well enough when they needed to adapt. Colombia were able to play around it because Portugal's distances were too large and the movements were not synchronised. João Felix could be caught in between Lerma and Santiago Arias, Ruben Neves could be caught in between the two Colombian pivots, and Pedro Neto could not narrow up enough from the right-hand side because Mercado held so much width on the far side, making the pressing distance too big. That meant Portugal could not cover every option. Colombia could find a free man before the next Portuguese player arrived, and crucially, Portugal lacked the defensive intensity to recover in those situations. They were not aggressive enough in moving between markers, they were not sharp enough in closing down once the ball had beaten the first line, so Colombia were able to progress. And the player who made that progression meaningful was James Rodriguez. He was the central piece of Colombia's possession. He would drop into passing lanes, receive from deep, and connect the structure together. His movement asked difficult questions of Portugal's markers. If Ruben Diaz stepped out to follow him, space could open up behind him. If Diaz stayed in the defensive line, James could receive and dictate play. And once Colombia settled into possession, James did not stay in a fixed position. He moved across the pitch, swapped positions with the midfielders around him, and helped Colombia change the point of attack. The positioning of James, Lerma, Puerta, and John Arias was very fluid. They adapted around him. At times, James would be the deepest creator. At other times, he would move into central spaces between Portugal's midfield and defence. From there, he could move the ball from side to side and help Colombia exploit the spaces Portugal left open. This was especially important because Luis Diaz and John Arias could occupy both narrow positions. When they came inside, they invited the fullback on that side to overlap, and because James could find those passes quickly, Colombia had a clear route into wide areas. Colombia were not only playing through James, they also had no problem going along to Cordoba. That became a very useful route forward because Cordoba had the physical beating of Renato Vega. Whenever Colombia played directly into him, Portugal's defensive line had decisions to make. Ruben Diaz would try to recover across and help cover the duel, but if Diaz moved towards the defensive line, James could be left free to collect second balls. And if Diaz could not recover quickly enough, the space between Vega and Cancelo opened up. That gave Luis Diaz the invitation to attack, and this was probably Colombia's most dangerous route. A direct ball into Cordoba, a second ball around James, and Diaz ready to attack the gap created by Portugal's defensive adjustment. Portugal built with their back four spread wide, with Vitinha and Ruben Neves as the double pivot. Bruno Fernandes played higher, while Ronaldo often dropped alongside him to help connect the attack. Colombia pressed in a disciplined 4-4-2. Lerma occupied Bruno Fernandes, Lakimi was ready to engage Ronaldo whenever he dropped away from the centre-back. One of James Rodriguez or Cordoba would sit on the pivot while the other pressed Vega, usually trying to angle Portugal's possession towards Ruben Diaz. Luis Diaz would then press towards Diaz from Cancelo's side, while John Arias stayed connected to Nuno Mendes on the far side, and Portugal tried to use Cancelo and Ruben Neves rotating positions to open up Colombia's pressing shape. And because Luis Diaz jumped to press Ruben Diaz, Portugal could create an overload on Mercado. Neto and Cancelo could combine on that side, with Neto playing into Cancelo's underlapping runs. This was one of Portugal's clearer attacking routes. When Colombia dropped deeper, Portugal's structure changed again. Nuno Mendes pushed higher on the left, allowing João Felix to operate more like an attacking midfielder. John Arias became crucial here because Colombia's shape could alternate between a 4-4-2 and a 5-3-2. When the ball went to Portugal's left side, Veiga looked to play around to Nuno Mendes. Santiago Arias would jump quickly to engage Mendes, but John Arias would then drop into the gap between Santiago and Davinson Sanchez, and that prevented the left half space from opening up for Felix to receive freely. So even when Portugal had the ball in promising areas, Colombia were quick to close the important spaces. They did not always stop the first pass, but they usually stopped the pass that would have really hurt them. In sustained attacks, Colombia often settled into a more fixed 5-3-2 against Portugal's 2-3-5. This allowed Bruno Fernandes or Vitinha to move into the deeper left-sided position in space. And these are fantastic players to have in those areas. They can progress from deep, they can switch play, and they can hit early passes into the front line. On the far side, Cancelo would also move forward, either outside or inside of Pedro Neto. Ruben Neves would then fill the fullback position behind them. If Portugal had built down one side, the far side player in the fullback position would narrow into a double pivot, giving Portugal central technical security. Structurally, there was logic, but once again, the problem was what happened ahead of the ball. Ronaldo kept dropping to help build up. That gave Portugal another player between the lines, but it also meant there was often nobody offering depth in the centre. Nobody was consistently pinning the centre backs, nobody was constantly attacking the space in behind, and nobody was making the box occupation feel dangerous enough. Portugal had players who could deliver, but not enough players attacking the delivery. Colombia could use James to connect play, Cordoba to go direct, Diaz to attack gaps, and the fullbacks to provide width. Portugal could use Vitinha, Bruno, Neves, Cancelo, and Mendes to progress the ball and create overloads. The structures were good enough to progress the ball, but not sharp enough to finish the attacks. And in tournament football, that difference matters. You can look controlled, you can look fluid, you can look technically secure. But if you do not threaten the space behind or attack the penalty area with enough numbers, games like this can become a tactical stalemate.